The snow had been falling for 3 days straight when Clara Thornton's horse stumbled into a ravine and snapped its leg, leaving her stranded 15 miles from anywhere that mattered in the Arizona territory. She knelt beside the mare, tears freezing on her cheeks as she pressed her forehead against the animal's neck, whispering apologies she knew wouldn't change anything. The January wind of 1885 howled through the ponderosa pines like a living thing, and the temperature had dropped so low that her breath came out in thick white clouds that vanished almost instantly. She had left Snowflake 3 days ago with supplies meant for her sister's family in Holbrook, convinced she could make the journey before the storm hit. But the blizzard had come early and fierce, and now she was going to die out here in the wilderness because of her own stubborn pride. She stood slowly, her legs shaking from cold and fear, and looked around at the white wasteland that surrounded her. The snow was already past her knees and showed no signs of stopping. Her coat, thick as it was, felt like paper against the wind. She had maybe an hour before hypothermia took her, maybe less. The realization settled over her like a shroud, and she almost laughed at the absurdity of it all. 23 years old, a schoolteacher with dreams of seeing San Francisco someday, and she was going to freeze to death in a snowdrift because she had been too proud to wait for an escort. Then she saw it through the swirling white, a dark shape that might have been a building. Clara blinked hard, certain she was hallucinating, but the shape remained. She left her dying horse with one final stroke along its muzzle and began trudging through the snow toward what she prayed was shelter. Each step felt like walking through wet cement. Her skirts were soaked through and heavy, dragging behind her. Her hands had gone numb inside her gloves. She focused on the dark shape ahead, willing it to be real, willing herself to keep moving. It was a cabin, small and rough-hewn but solid, with smoke curling from a stone chimney. Clara nearly sobbed with relief. She stumbled toward the door and pounded on it with fists she could barely feel. The wind swallowed the sound almost immediately, but she kept pounding, kept calling out, until finally the door swung open and she fell forward into warmth and firelight. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor. A man's voice, deep and concerned, said something she couldn't quite hear over the ringing in her ears. She felt herself being lifted, carried, and then she was being set down near a fire that blazed in a stone fireplace. The heat was almost painful against her frozen skin. "Can you hear me, miss?" The voice came again, clearer now. "Miss, I need you to stay awake. Can you tell me your name?" Clara forced her eyes to focus. The man kneeling beside her was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and gray eyes that studied her with intense concern. He had a strong jaw covered in several days' worth of stubble, and there was something solid and dependable about him that made her feel marginally safer despite her situation. "Clara," she managed through chattering teeth. "Clara Thornton, Porter McCall," he said. "You are about as close to frozen as a person can get without being dead. We need to get you out of these wet clothes." Clara's eyes widened despite her exhaustion, and Porter held up his hands quickly. "I will turn my back and tend the fire. There is a blanket here, my only spare. You need to get those wet things off, or you will lose fingers and toes, maybe worse." He was right. She knew he was right, but the impropriety of the situation made her hesitate. Then another shiver racked her body so violently her teeth clacked together, and survival instinct won out over modesty. Porter turned his back as promised, and Clara struggled with numb fingers to undo the buttons of her coat, her dress, the layers of sodden petticoats. Everything was soaked through and ice-cold against her skin. She stripped down to her chemise and drawers, which were mercifully only damp rather than soaked, and wrapped herself in the thick wool blanket Porter had left beside her. It smelled like wood smoke and leather and something else, something masculine and not unpleasant. "I am decent," she said, her voice still shaking. Porter turned back and nodded approvingly. He had draped her wet clothes over a rope he had strung near the fire, and now he moved to a small pot hanging over the flames. "I have coffee. It is not much, but it is hot." He poured the steaming liquid into a tin cup and brought it to her. Clara wrapped both hands around it, grateful for the warmth, and took a careful sip. It was strong and bitter and absolutely perfect. She took another sip, then another, feeling the heat spread through her chest. "Thank you," she said. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did." Porter settled himself on the other side of the fire, giving her space. "What were you doing out in this storm?" Clara explained about her journey to Holbrook, about the blizzard coming early, about her horse. Porter listened without interrupting, his expression grave. "That horse saved your life by getting you close enough to see my cabin," he said when she finished. "Another mile in any other direction and you would have missed it entirely." "Where are we exactly?" "About 12 miles northeast of Snowflake, up in the high country. I have a small ranch another few miles from here, but I use this cabin during winter when I am checking on cattle in the upper ranges. I rode up here 2 days ago and got caught in the storm myself." Clara looked around the cabin properly for the first time. It was small, maybe 15 feet square, with the fireplace taking up most of one wall. There was a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner covered with what looked like a single thin blanket, and shelves holding basic supplies. A rifle hung over the door. It was sparse and masculine but clean and well-maintained. "How long do you think the storm will last?" she asked. Porter walked to the single window and peered out at the white wall of wind and snow. "Hard to say. Could be another day, could be a week. I have seen winter storms up here that lasted 10 days straight. We are sealed in good and proper until it breaks." The reality of the situation settled over Clara like a weight. She was trapped in a tiny cabin with a strange man, wearing nothing but her underclothes and a blanket, with no way to leave and no way to let anyone know she was alive. Her reputation would be destroyed if anyone ever found out. Then again, she reminded herself, she would be dead if not for Porter's cabin and his kindness, so perhaps her reputation was a small price to pay for her life. "I have food enough for both of us if we are careful," Porter said, as if reading some of her concerns. "Beans, salt pork, cornmeal, coffee. Not fancy, but it will keep us going. And there is plenty of firewood stacked outside the door, enough to last through a month of storms if needed." "I do not want to be a burden," Clara said softly. Porter looked at her and something flickered in those gray eyes. "You are not a burden. You are a person who needed help, and I am glad I was here to provide it. Out here we take care of each other. That is just how it is." His words were simple but sincere, and Clara felt something unknot in her chest. She nodded and took another sip of coffee. The rest of that first day passed in quiet domesticity that felt strange given the circumstances. Porter cooked beans and salt pork in a cast iron skillet, and they ate sitting by the fire. Clara kept the blanket wrapped tightly around herself, acutely aware that her undergarments, while modest, were still undergarments. Porter seemed determined to give her as much privacy and space as the small cabin would allow. He did not stare, did not make her feel uncomfortable with inappropriate comments or looks. Instead, he treated her with a respectful courtesy that she found surprising and touching. As evening fell and the light outside the window faded to a uniform gray-white, the temperature in the cabin began to drop despite the fire. Porter added more wood and poked at the flames, but Clara could feel the cold creeping in around the edges of the room. She pulled the blanket tighter and tried not to shiver. "You should take the bed," Porter said, gesturing to the narrow cot in the corner. "Where will you sleep?" Clara asked. "On the floor by the fire. It will be warm enough." Clara looked at the hard wooden floor and then at Porter's broad shoulders and long legs. He would be miserable trying to sleep on that floor. "That does not seem fair. This is your cabin, your bed. And you are my guest, and you nearly froze to death a few hours ago. You need rest and warmth." "I will be fine." There was no arguing with the firmness in his voice. Clara nodded and made her way to the bed, still wrapped in the blanket. The mattress was thin, stuffed with straw or corn husks from the feel of it, and there was only the one threadbare blanket Porter had mentioned. She lay down and pulled it over herself, adding it to the blanket she was already wrapped in, but it was not enough. The cold seeped up through the thin mattress and in through the cracks in the walls. She could hear the wind howling outside like a wolf, and the cabin creaked and groaned under the assault of the storm. Clara curled into a ball, trying to conserve heat, but her teeth began to chatter within minutes. She clenched her jaw to stop the sound, not wanting to complain, but apparently Porter heard anyway. "You are freezing," he said from his spot by the fire. "I am fine," Clara lied. "No, you are not." She heard him stand and move around the cabin. "This is not going to work. That bed is too far from the fire, and those blankets are not enough for a night this cold." "What do you suggest?" Clara asked through chattering teeth. There was a long pause. Then Porter said carefully, "The warmest place in this cabin is right here by the fire. And the best way to stay warm when you do not have enough blankets is to share body heat. I know it is not proper, but freezing to death is not proper either. I give you my word as a gentleman that I will not take advantage of the situation." Clara's heart hammered in her chest. The suggestion was scandalous, completely beyond the pale of acceptable behavior. But she was so cold, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. She thought about dying of cold out of some misplaced sense of propriety and realized how foolish that would be. "All right," she said quietly. "But you must promise to be a gentleman." "I promise," Porter said solemnly. He moved the thin mattress from the bed frame and dragged it closer to the fire, then layered both blankets on top of it. Clara climbed under the blankets first, lying on her side facing the fire, and then Porter lay down behind her, leaving a careful few inches of space between them. He had removed his boots and his heavy coat, but was otherwise fully dressed. For a few minutes they lay there stiffly, both hyper-aware of the other's presence, while the fire crackled and the wind screamed outside. But slowly, gradually, Clara stopped shivering. The combination of the fire, the blankets, and Porter's body heat behind her created a warm cocoon that felt like heaven after hours of freezing cold. Her muscles began to relax, and exhaustion rolled over her like a wave. Her eyes drifted closed. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything." "Sleep," Porter said softly. "You are safe now. And despite everything, despite the impropriety and the strangeness of the situation, Clara believed him. She drifted off to sleep feeling safer than she had in hours, maybe days, lulled by the warmth and the steady sound of Porter's breathing behind her. She woke sometime in the night to find that they had moved closer together in their sleep. Her back was pressed against Porter's chest, and his arm had draped over her waist. She should have been alarmed, should have pulled away, but the warmth was too precious, and he was still clearly asleep, his breathing deep and even. She could feel the solid strength of him behind her, protective and reassuring. Clara let her eyes drift closed again and allowed herself to sink back into sleep. When she woke again, pale winter light was filtering through the window and Porter was already up, feeding the fire and setting water to boil. Clara sat up slowly, clutching the blanket around herself, and finger-combed her hair, which had come completely loose from its pins during the night. "How do you feel?" Porter asked, glancing at her. Better. Warmer. Thank you for last night, he nodded. The storm is still going strong. I went out to check just before dawn. Snow is up past the door frame. I had to dig us out just to get it open. Clara moved to the window and looked out at the endless white. It was impossible to see more than a few feet in any direction. The world had been reduced to this one small cabin and the man she shared it with. Porter made a breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee, and they ate in companionable silence. Afterward, Clara insisted on cleaning up, needing to do something useful, to contribute. Her clothes were mostly dry by then, and she asked Porter to turn his back again while she dressed. The fabric was stiff and rough from drying by the fire, but it felt good to be properly clothed again, to have that barrier of propriety back in place. The day stretched out long and strange. There was little to do in the small cabin. Porter checked the fire constantly, venturing out periodically to bring in more wood from the stack by the door. Each time he opened the door, a blast of frigid air and snow would swirl in, and Clara would see the wall of white beyond and understand just how trapped they really were. They talked to pass the time. Porter told her about his ranch, about the 100 head of cattle he ran in the high country, about his plans to expand once he saved enough money. He had come to Arizona from Colorado 5 years ago, drawn by the promise of cheap land and new opportunities. He spoke of his work with quiet pride, and Clara found herself fascinated by the details of a life so different from her own. In turn, she told him about teaching school in Snowflake, about her students and their struggles and triumphs. She talked about growing up in Missouri, about coming west with her family when she was 15, about losing her parents to influenza 3 years ago. Her sister Margaret was all the family she had left, which was why she had been so determined to reach Holbrook, to make sure Margaret and her family were doing well. "They will be worried about you," Porter said gently. "I know, but there is nothing to be done about it until the storm clears. I just have to trust that they will understand I would not have stayed away by choice." As afternoon faded into evening, the temperature dropped again, and Porter prepared another simple meal. They ate, cleaned up, and then faced the question of sleeping arrangements once more. This time there was no discussion. Porter simply laid out the mattress by the fire and prepared the blankets, and when it was time to sleep, they lay down together as they had the night before. Clara found it easier this time, less frightening and more comforting. She was becoming accustomed to Porter's presence, to his quiet strength and careful courtesy. When she woke in the night to find herself curled against his chest with his arm around her, she did not pull away. Instead, she listened to the steady beat of his heart and felt something shift inside her, some small crack in the walls she had built around herself since her parents died. The days began to blur together. The storm continued unabated, trapping them in their small warm bubble while the world outside raged white and cold. They fell into routines. Porter would wake first and build up the fire. Clara would make coffee and whatever passed for breakfast. They would talk, or sometimes just sit in comfortable silence. Porter taught her to play poker with a worn deck of cards he found in a drawer, and Clara discovered she had a talent for bluffing that made him laugh. She told him stories from the books she had read, and he listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering thoughts. On the 4th day, Porter ventured out to check on the woodpile and came back with his face grim. "We need to be more conservative with the wood," he said. "The storm has buried the main pile, and I can only reach what was right by the door. We have enough for maybe 3 more days if we are careful." "And if the storm lasts longer than that?" Clara asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then we will have to burn the furniture and hope the storm breaks before we run out of cabin." It was meant as a joke, but neither of them laughed. The reality of their situation was becoming clearer. They were not just inconvenienced, they were in real danger. That night, they huddled closer together for warmth as the fire burned lower than it had in previous nights. Clara found herself pressed fully against Porter's chest, his arms wrapped around her, and there was nothing improper about it now. It was simple survival. She could feel the strong, steady beat of his heart against her back, feel the warmth of his breath against her hair, and she realized with a start that she felt safe. More than safe. She felt cared for, protected, in a way she had not felt since her father died. "Porter," she said softly into the darkness. "Yes, I am glad it was your cabin I found. I am glad it was you." His arms tightened around her fractionally. "So am I." Something passed between them in that moment, some unspoken understanding. Clara felt it settle over her like the blankets they shared, warm and real and undeniable. The next morning, the 5th day of the storm, Clara woke alone. Porter was at the window, peering out with an intensity that made her sit up. "What is it?" she asked. "The wind is dying down." "I think the storm might be breaking." Clara scrambled up and joined him at the window. He was right. The white wall of wind and snow had thinned to just snow falling steadily. She could see trees now, dark shapes emerging from the white. "Another few hours and it should be clear enough to travel," Porter said. "Or at least clear enough to assess the situation." Clara should have felt relieved, but instead something like disappointment settled in her chest. Once the storm cleared, they would leave this cabin and return to their separate lives. She would go back to being Miss Thornton, the schoolteacher, and he would go back to being Porter McCall, the rancher, and this strange, intimate interlude would be over. "That is good news," she made herself say. Porter looked at her and something flickered in his gray eyes. "Is it?" The question hung in the air between them. Clara opened her mouth, closed it again. She did not know how to answer, did not know if she dared to answer honestly. Before she could figure it out, Porter turned away. "I should go check the horses. I have 2 in a lean-to shelter out back. They will need attention." He bundled up and went out, leaving Clara alone with her swirling thoughts. She busied herself making coffee and breakfast, trying not to think about what would happen when they left this place. Trying not to think about how empty her little room behind the schoolhouse was going to feel after 5 days of constant companionship. Trying not to think about how much she had come to care for this quiet, honorable man in such a short time. Porter returned an hour later with good news. The horses were fine, sheltered and with enough hay to have weathered the storm. The snow had stopped falling, though the sky remained heavy and gray. The drifts were immense, but Porter thought they could make their way down to Snowflake by afternoon if they started soon. They prepared to leave in near silence. Clara felt a growing sense of loss with each small task. She folded the blankets they had shared. She made sure the fire was safely banked. She watched Porter gather his things, and each movement felt like a countdown to goodbye. Finally, there was nothing left to delay. Porter helped Clara onto one of his horses, then mounted the other. The cold hit her like a wall after days in the warm cabin, but the sun was trying to break through the clouds and the wind had dropped to nothing. They set out through the snow, the horses struggling through drifts that sometimes reached their bellies. The journey to Snowflake took twice as long as it should have. They had to pick their way carefully, avoiding hidden obstacles beneath the snow. They did not talk much. There did not seem to be anything to say, or maybe there was too much to say and no way to begin. As they crested the final rise and Snowflake came into view below them, its buildings half buried in white, Clara felt a lump form in her throat. This was it, then. The end of their story. Porter guided them to the small house where Clara rented her room from Mrs. Patterson, the widow who ran the boarding house. The older woman nearly fainted when she saw Clara. then swept her into a fierce hug, exclaiming about how worried everyone had been, about how they had all thought she must have died in the storm. Through the flurry of questions and exclamations, Clara was aware of Porter standing quietly to the side, holding his hat in his hands. Finally, Mrs. Patterson's attention turned to him. "And who might you be, young man?" "Porter McCall, madam. I have a ranch up in the high country. Miss Thornton took shelter in my line cabin during the storm." Mrs. Patterson's eyes went sharp and calculating. Clara saw the woman's mind working, saw her adding up 5 days, 1 cabin, 2 young people, saw the conclusions forming. "I see," Mrs. Patterson said slowly. "And you brought her safely home. That was very kind of you, Mr. McCall." "It was the right thing to do," Porter said simply. He turned to Clara. "I am glad you are safe, Miss Thornton. Take care of yourself." He turned to leave, and Clara felt panic surge in her chest. He was just going to leave. After everything they had shared, after the way they had held each other in the darkness, after that moment at the window when he had asked if she was really glad the storm was ending. "Porter, wait," she called out. He stopped and turned back. Their eyes met, and Clara saw in his face everything she was feeling. The confusion, the longing, the fear of hoping for something that seemed impossible. "Thank you," she said, because she could not say the rest with Mrs. Patterson standing right there watching. "Thank you for saving my life." He nodded once, put his hat back on, and mounted his horse. Clara watched him ride away through the snow-covered streets until he turned a corner and disappeared. Mrs. Patterson steered Clara inside and fussed over her, drawing a hot bath and preparing food and clucking over how thin Clara looked after her ordeal. Clara submitted to it all numbly, but her mind was elsewhere, tracking north to the high country where Porter would be riding, wondering if he was thinking about her. That night, lying in her own bed in her own room, Clara could not sleep. The bed felt too big, too empty. She kept reaching for a warmth that was not there, kept listening for the sound of Porter's steady breathing. She stared at the ceiling and tried to tell herself that what she was feeling was just gratitude, just the heightened emotions of having survived something dangerous together. In a few days it would fade and she would go back to her normal life and forget all about Porter McCall. But she knew she was lying to herself. The next morning, Clara went to the school and reassured her students and their parents that she was well. Then she sent a telegram to her sister in Hallbrook explaining what had happened, that she was safe, that she would try to come visit when the roads cleared in spring. She bought supplies to replace what she had lost with her horse. She went through all the motions of resuming her normal life. But everything felt hollow now, like she was play-acting rather than actually living. She kept thinking about the cabin, about Porter's gray eyes and quiet strength, about the way she had felt so completely safe in his arms. She told herself she was being foolish, that she barely knew him, that 5 days was not enough time to really know a person, let alone fall in love with them. Except, she could not shake the feeling that she had learned more about Porter McCall in those 5 days than she had learned about some people she had known for years. She had seen his kindness, his honor, his dry sense of humor. She had felt his gentleness and his strength. And she had seen in his eyes in that last moment before he rode away that he felt something 2-3 days past. Then 4. Clara threw herself into her teaching, preparing elaborate lessons that her students found mystifying. She helped Mrs. Patterson with extra chores around the boarding house. She did everything she could to keep busy, to keep from thinking about Porter. On the 5th day after returning to Snowflake, Clara was in the schoolhouse after lessons had ended, cleaning the blackboard and preparing for the next day, when she heard footsteps on the porch. She turned, expecting one of her students or a parent, and instead found Porter standing in the doorway, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way she had never seen him look before. "Porter," she breathed. "I hope I am not intruding," he said. "I know you must be busy, getting back to your regular life, but He trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. Clara set down the eraser she had been holding and moved toward him slowly, afraid that sudden movement might spook him like a wild horse. "You are not intruding. I am glad to see you." "Are you?" The question came out raw, vulnerable. "Because I have not been able to stop thinking about you, Clara, about those days in the cabin, about how right it felt to wake up with you in my arms. And I know it was just survival, just circumstance, but I keep thinking maybe it was more than that. Maybe I am crazy, maybe 5 days is not enough time, but I had to come here and tell you that I would like to see you again. Properly. Court you if you will let me." Clara's heart was hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You are not crazy," she said softly. "I have been thinking about you too, about us. I thought I was the only one who felt this way." Porter's expression transformed, relief and joy flooding his features. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her hands in his. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it." Clara looked up into those gray eyes and felt a smile break across her face. "I would like very much if you would court me, Porter McCall." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, and the touch sent warmth flooding through her entire body. "Then I will come calling this Sunday if that suits you. I will speak to Mrs. Patterson and do this properly. That suits me just fine." They stood there grinning at each other like fools until Clara remembered herself and stepped back. "You should go before someone sees us alone and starts talking." Porter nodded but made no move to leave. "One more thing. That cabin, the one where we stayed, it is mine. I built it myself 3 years ago. I want you to know that I will never think of it the same way again. It will always be the place where I met you, where I fell in love with you." Clara's breath caught. "You love me." "I do." Porter said it simply, with no doubt or hesitation. "I know it is fast. I know people will say it is impossible, but I love you, Clara Thornton. I think I started loving you the moment you fell through my door, half frozen and still trying to be polite about it." Tears pricked Clara's eyes, happy tears this time. "I love you too. I did not want to admit it to myself, but I love you. I think I started loving you the night you gave me the fire and your only blanket and slept on the cold floor to keep me safe." Porter pulled her into his arms then, propriety be damned, and held her close. Clara wrapped her arms around him and pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, wood smoke and leather and something uniquely Porter. She felt like she had come home. "I should go," he murmured against her hair, "before I do something that will truly scandalize Mrs. Patterson." Clara laughed and pulled back. "Sunday then." "Sunday," he agreed. He left, and Clara sank into her chair, pressing her hands to her cheeks. She felt light, buoyant, like she might float away at any moment. Porter loved her. He wanted to court her. The storm that had nearly killed her had instead brought her the greatest gift she could imagine. True to his word, Porter came calling that Sunday. He arrived in clean clothes with his hair slicked back, looking nervous and earnest as he sat in Mrs. Patterson's parlor making polite conversation while the widow watched them like a hawk. Clara served tea and tried not to stare at him too obviously, but she could not stop smiling. Mrs. Patterson's expression suggested she knew exactly what was going on and was not entirely certain she approved, but she kept her opinions to herself. Porter began coming to Snowflake every Sunday after that, and soon Wednesdays too. He would take Clara for walks around town, or they would sit in the parlor and talk while Mrs. Patterson pretended not to eavesdrop from the next room. Slowly but surely, the whole town became aware that their schoolteacher was being courted by the rancher from the high country, and opinions were mixed. Some thought it was romantic, the way they had met during the blizzard. Others whispered about the impropriety of it all, about 5 days alone in a cabin, about what might have happened. Clara heard the whispers and held her head high, knowing the truth, knowing that Porter had behaved with nothing but honor and respect. Winter slowly loosened its grip on the high country. The snow began to melt, and the roads cleared. In February, Porter took Clara to visit his main ranch, a beautiful spread in a valley surrounded by pine-covered hills. The ranch house was larger than the cabin, but still rough and masculine, clearly the home of a bachelor. Clara could see the potential in it, though, could imagine curtains on the windows and a garden in the yard and children playing on the porch. "It is not much yet," Porter said, watching her anxiously. "But I have plans. I want to build a bigger house, a real home. I want to expand the herd, maybe start breeding horses too. I want to build something lasting here." "It is wonderful," Clara said honestly. "I can see how hard you have worked, how much you have built. You should be proud." "I want to build it with you," Porter said quietly. "I want you here, Clara. I want you as my wife, as my partner in all of this. I know we have not been courting long by most standards, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Clara turned to face him fully. "Are you asking me to marry you, Porter McCall?" "I am." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. She gave it to me before I came west, told me to give it to the woman who made me want to build a home instead of just a ranch. That woman is you, Clara. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Clara said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Porter slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms and kissed her for the first time. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Clara felt like her heart might burst with happiness. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like idiots. "I am the luckiest man alive," Porter said. "We are both lucky," Clara corrected. "That storm brought us together. It could have killed me, but instead it gave me you." They set the wedding for May, wanting to give Clara time to finish the school year and make proper arrangements. Her sister Margaret made the journey from Holbrook, delighted by the news and charmed by Porter when she met him. Mrs. Patterson grudgingly admitted that the rancher seemed like a good man, and perhaps things had worked out for the best after all. The wedding was held in the small church in Snowflake on a bright May morning. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, and carried wildflowers that Porter had picked himself. Her students filled the pews along with what seemed like half the town. When Porter saw her walking down the aisle, his expression was so full of love and awe that Clara had to blink back tears. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days. When the minister said Porter could kiss his bride, he did so tenderly, reverently, as if Clara were something precious and fragile. The congregation cheered, and Clara laughed against his lips. The wedding breakfast was held at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, and it was a cheerful, rowdy affair with music and dancing and enough food to feed an army. Porter kept Clara close to his side all day, one hand always at the small of her back or holding hers, as if he needed the physical contact to believe this was real. Finally, in the late afternoon, they said their goodbyes and rode north toward Porter's ranch and their new life together. Clara was riding the gentle mare Porter had given her as a wedding gift, and their saddlebags were packed with gifts and supplies. The sun was warm on Clara's face, and the world was green and beautiful after the long winter. When they reached the ranch, Porter lifted Clara from her horse and carried her over the threshold of the ranch house, making her laugh. He set her down gently in what would be their bedroom, and suddenly they were both shy, aware that this was their wedding night, that everything was about to change. "I love you," Porter said, cupping Clara's face in his hands. "I will spend every day of my life trying to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Clara said, covering his hands with hers. "Just by being you." They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other in the fading daylight. It was sweet and a little awkward and absolutely perfect. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, and Clara rested her head on Porter's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "You remember that first night in the cabin?" she asked softly, "when you gave me the fire and your only blanket?" "I remember everything about those days," Porter said, his hand stroking her hair. "I knew then that you were different, that you were good and kind and honorable. I think I started falling in love with you then, even though I did not want to admit it." "I was terrified that whole time," Porter admitted. "Terrified that you would freeze, terrified that I would do something wrong, terrified that when the storm ended you would leave and I would never see you again. When I brought you back to town and had to just ride away, it felt like leaving part of myself behind. But you came back. You came to the school and told me you loved me. I had to. I could not let you go, could not let fear stop me from fighting for what I wanted. And what I wanted, what I still want more than anything, is you." Clara lifted her head to kiss him. "You have me, for always." Life on the ranch was not easy. Clara had to learn 100 new skills, from cooking on a wood stove to caring for chickens to helping with the cattle during roundup. There were moments of frustration and failure, times when she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake trading her tidy schoolteacher life for this hard rancher existence. But there were far more moments of joy and satisfaction. She loved waking up next to Porter every morning. She loved working beside him to build something lasting. She loved the way he looked at her, like she was the most precious thing in his world. That first summer, they worked hard to improve the ranch. Porter built a new barn with help from neighboring ranchers, and Clara planted a large vegetable garden. They saved every penny they could, planning for the future. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about their dreams and making plans. By autumn, Clara knew she was pregnant. She told Porter one evening after supper, and he was so overjoyed he picked her up and spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. He became impossibly protective after that, trying to do all the heavy work himself, and treating Clara like she might break at any moment. She had to firmly remind him that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and that she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. Their son was born in May of 1886, exactly 1 year after their wedding. Porter paced outside the bedroom while Mrs. Patterson and Margaret attended to Clara, and when he was finally allowed in to meet his son, there were tears streaming down his face. They named him William Thomas McCall, after both their fathers. Being parents changed them both. Porter became even more driven to make the ranch successful, wanting to provide for his family. Clara found a depth of love she had not known she was capable of, a fierce, protective instinct that sometimes surprised her. They were exhausted and overwhelmed and completely in love with each other and their baby. When William was 6 months old, Clara and Porter made a journey back to the cabin where they had first met. It had been nearly 2 years since the blizzard, and Clara wanted to see it again, to show their son where his parents' story began. They rode up in early autumn, when the aspen leaves were turning gold and the weather was still mild. The cabin looked smaller than Clara remembered, more weathered. But it was still solid, still standing firm against whatever storms might come. They went inside, and Clara walked around the small space, remembering. Here was where she had stood when Porter first gave her coffee. There was the spot where they had laid the mattress by the fire. This was the window where they had watched for the storm to break. Strange to think that if the storm had not come, if your horse had not stumbled, if you had gone a different direction, we never would have met, Porter said, bouncing William gently in his arms. I used to be angry about that storm, Clara said. Angry that it nearly killed me, angry that I lost my horse and my supplies. But now I am grateful for it. That storm brought me to you. It gave me everything I have now. The storm, and you being stubborn enough to travel alone, Porter said with a teasing smile. Clara swatted his arm playfully. I prefer to think of it as independent and brave. Stubborn, Porter repeated, but he kissed her forehead to show he did not mean it. They spread a blanket on the floor, the same floor where they had slept those first nights, and had a picnic lunch. William crawled around exploring while his parents watched indulgently. Then Porter pulled out his knife and carved something into the wooden beam over the fireplace. cm plus pm 1885. So anyone who uses this cabin in the future will know this is where our story began, he explained. Clara traced the carving with her fingers, then kissed him. I love you, Porter McCall. I love you too, Clara McCall, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person. They returned to the ranch that evening, and life went on. William grew from a baby to a toddler, into a curious little boy who followed his father everywhere and adored his mother. Clara taught him his letters and numbers, and Porter taught him about ranching and the land. They were happy in the simple, profound way of people who have found exactly where they are meant to be. 3 years after William was born, Clara gave birth to twin daughters, Sarah and Catherine. The ranch house suddenly seemed very small and very loud, and Porter began making plans for the bigger house he had always promised. With help from neighbors and hired hands, he spent the next 2 years building a beautiful 2-story home with a real parlor and a proper kitchen and bedrooms enough for their growing family. They moved into the new house in the spring of 1891, and Clara cried when she saw the spacious rooms and the fine glass windows that Porter had ordered special from back east. It was more than she had ever dreamed of, more than she had ever expected when she set out for Holbrook all those years ago and got caught in a blizzard. That summer, they hosted a party to celebrate the new house. Neighbors came from miles around, and the yard was full of people eating and talking and dancing to fiddle music. Clara stood on the porch watching Porter dance with their daughters, one on each foot, while William showed off his roping skills to the other children. Margaret was there with her family, and Mrs. Patterson had made the journey from Snowflake. It was noisy and chaotic and absolutely perfect. Later, after everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, Porter and Clara sat on the porch of their new house and looked up at the stars. The night was cool and clear, and they could hear the distant sound of cattle lowing. "Are you happy?" Porter asked, taking Clara's hand. "More than I ever thought possible," Clara said honestly. "Sometimes I think about that frightened girl who stumbled through a blizzard and found a cabin just in time, and I can hardly believe that was me. I can hardly believe this is my life now." "You ever miss teaching?" Clara considered the question. "Sometimes I miss the students, the feeling of helping young minds grow. But I am teaching our children now, and that is even better. I made the right choice, Porter. I would make the same choice 1,000 times over." Porter lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I will never take you for granted. I will never forget how lucky I am that you stumbled into my cabin that day." "We are both lucky," Clara said. "That storm could have killed me, but instead it brought me home. It brought me to you." They sat in comfortable silence, hands entwined, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside the house, their children slept safe and warm. Around them, the ranch they had built together sprawled across the valley. And somewhere up in the high country, A small, rough cabin still stood against the elements, holding the memory of a blizzard and two people who found love in the midst of a storm. Time continued its steady march. William grew into a tall, strong young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Sarah became a teacher like her mother, taking a position at the school in Snowflake. Catherine decided she wanted to be a doctor, shocking everyone but her parents, who supported her dreams and helped her find a way to attend medical school back east. Porter and Clara grew older together, their hair going gray, their faces weathering like the land around them. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper and more precious with each passing year. They had weathered storms together, literal and metaphorical. They had built a life from nothing, raised children, created a legacy. And through it all, they had loved each other with the fierce, devoted constancy that comes from knowing you have found your person, your home, your other half. In the winter of 1915, when they were both in their 50s, another blizzard hit the high country. Porter and Clara sat by the fire in their warm house and watched the snow pile up outside, and they both thought of that other storm 30 years earlier. 30 years, Clara mused. Can you believe it has been 30 years since the storm that brought us together? Best thing that ever happened to me, Porter said. Well, that and you being stubborn enough to go traveling alone in winter. Independent, Clara corrected with a smile. And you being kind enough to give a freezing stranger your fire and your only blanket. I would do it again in a heartbeat. I know you would. That is who you are. That is why I love you. They sat together on the couch, Clara's head on Porter's shoulder, watching the fire and listening to the wind howl outside, and they were grateful. Grateful for the storm that had brought them together. Grateful for the years they had shared. Grateful for the love that had sustained them through good times and hard times alike. The storm raged for 3 days, just like that first storm had all those years ago. And when it finally cleared and the sun came out, Porter took Clara's hand and they walked out into a world transformed by white. Everything was clean and new and beautiful, just like their love had been all those years ago when they first admitted their feelings in a tiny cabin in the high country. I love you, Clara McCall, Porter said, pulling her close. I love you, Porter McCall, Clara replied. Today and always. They kissed there in the snow. Two people who had been brought together by chance and stayed together by choice. And if anyone had asked them in that moment if they believed in fate or destiny or divine providence, they would have said yes. Because what else could you call it when a white blizzard sealed them in one cabin, when a cowboy gave her the fire and his only blanket, and when that simple act of kindness blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime? The years continued to pass in the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Porter and Clara celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. William had taken over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch, and he was doing well, expanding the operation and introducing new cattle breeds. Sarah had married a lawyer from Hallbrook and had 3 children of her own, all of whom loved visiting the ranch and hearing stories about their grandparents. Catherine had finished medical school and returned to Arizona, opening a practice in Flagstaff where she served everyone from ranchers to railroad workers to the local tribes. She brought pride and joy to her parents every single day. Porter and Clara had slowed down some. Their joints ached on cold mornings, and they could no longer work from sunup to sundown like they once had. But they were content. They spent their days helping where they could, spoiling their grandchildren, and enjoying the life they had built together. Every evening, without fail, they would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, hands clasped together, and count their blessings. On a warm June evening in 1925, when they had been married for 40 years, Porter took Clara back up to the cabin one more time. They were older now, and the ride took longer than it once had, but they made it. The cabin was still there, weathered and worn but standing strong. The carving Porter had made all those years ago was still visible over the fireplace. CM plus PM, 1885. 40 years, Clara said softly, running her fingers over the old wood. 40 years since a terrified schoolteacher fell through that door and found her future. 40 years since the luckiest day of my life, Porter agreed. He pulled Clara close, and they slow danced in the small cabin to music only they could hear, the music of shared memories and deep abiding love. You remember how scared we were? Clara asked. How improper it all seemed. How we thought we could never possibly fall in love in just 5 days. I remember thinking I had lost my mind, Porter said with a chuckle. I remember bringing you back to town and riding away thinking my heart was going to break. I remember being terrified when I showed up at the schoolhouse to tell you I loved you, certain you would tell me I was crazy. And then I told you I loved you too. Best moment of my life. Well, second best. Best was when you said yes to marrying me. No, best was when you first kissed me, Clara teased. Actually, best was the day William was born, or when the twins arrived. They laughed together, the easy laughter of people who have shared a lifetime. Because the truth was, there were too many best moments to count. Their life together had been full of best moments, strung together like pearls on a string, creating something beautiful and precious and entirely their own. As the sun began to set, they left the cabin and rode slowly back toward home. The ranch house came into view as darkness fell, lights glowing warmly in the windows. They could see the shapes of their family moving inside, getting ready for the anniversary supper William and his wife had planned. Their children, their grandchildren, all gathered to celebrate the love story that had begun in a blizzard 40 years ago. Porter helped Clara down from her horse, and they stood together in the yard, looking at their home. Thank you, Porter said quietly. For what? For saying yes. For taking a chance on a rancher you barely knew. For building this life with me. For giving me 40 years of love and laughter and partnership. For everything, Clara. Thank you for everything. Clara turned to face him, reaching up to cup his weathered face in her hands. Thank you for being the kind of man who gave a freezing stranger his fire and his only blanket. Thank you for showing me what love could be. Thank you for 40 years of being loved and cherished and valued. Thank you for being my home, Porter. They kissed there in the twilight, and it was as sweet and full of promise as their first kiss had been all those years ago. Some things they had learned only get better with time. Love was one of those things. Inside, their family was waiting. There would be food and laughter and stories and love. There would be grandchildren clamoring for attention and children fussing over their parents. There would be joy and celebration, and the kind of bone-deep happiness that comes from being surrounded by people you love and who love you back. But for just a moment more, Porter and Clara stood together in the growing darkness. Two people who had found each other in the midst of a storm and had held on tight through every storm that came after. Two people who had chosen each other every single day for 40 years and would keep choosing each other for whatever days they had left. Shall we go in? Clara asked. Together, Porter said, taking her hand. Always together, Clara agreed. And hand in hand, they walked into the warm, bright house, into the waiting arms of their family, into the life they had built together through love and determination and faith. Behind them, the stars began to come out one by one, scattered across the darkening sky like diamonds. And somewhere up in the high country, a small cabin stood silent and empty, holding its secrets and its memories, a testament to the power of a blizzard, a blanket, and a love that lasted a lifetime. The years that followed were gentle ones, full of quiet joys and simple pleasures. Porter and Clara grew old together with grace, supporting each other through the inevitable challenges of aging. When Porter's knees finally gave out and he could no longer ride like he once had, Clara was there to help him adjust, finding ways for him to contribute to the ranch from horseback and on foot. When Clara's eyesight began to fail, Porter read to her every evening, his deep voice bringing her beloved books to life in a way that made her fall in love with the stories all over again. Their children worried about them, tried to convince them to move into town where things would be easier, but Porter and Clara refused. The ranch was their home, the place where they had built their life together. They would stay there until the end, whatever and whenever that might be. That end came on a cold January morning in 1930, 45 years after the blizzard that had brought them together. Porter woke in the pre-dawn darkness and knew immediately that something was different. Clara lay beside him, peaceful and still, and he knew before he touched her that she was gone. She had slipped away in the night, quietly and without fuss, exactly as she would have wanted. The grief that crashed over Porter was immense, a wave that threatened to pull him under. But even through the pain, he felt grateful. Grateful that she had not suffered, that she had gone peacefully in her sleep. Grateful for 45 years of marriage, for the life they had built, for the love they had shared. Grateful that he had been given the precious gift of loving Clara Thornton McCall and being loved by her in return. The funeral was held on a clear, cold day. The little church in Snowflake was packed with people whose lives Clara had touched, students she had taught, families she had helped, friends she had made over decades of living in the community. Porter sat in the front pew surrounded by his children and grandchildren, and he listened to the stories people told about Clara, her kindness, her intelligence, her strength, her love, and he was proud, so proud to have been her husband, so grateful to have been chosen by her. After the funeral, Porter returned to the ranch. The house felt empty without Clara's presence, silent in a way it had never been before. He wandered from room to room, touching things she had touched, remembering. Here was her favorite chair by the fire. There was her sewing basket with an unfinished project still in it. This was the kitchen where she had cooked thousands of meals, where she had taught their daughters to bake bread. Every corner of the house held her memory. William wanted his father to move in with him and his wife, but Porter refused. "Your mother and I built this house together," he said. "I will stay here with her memory." So his children took turns checking on him, making sure he ate and stayed warm and did not sink too far into his grief. And slowly, over the weeks and months that followed, Porter found a way to live with the loss. Not to get over it, never that, but to carry it with him like a precious burden. He talked to Clara every day, telling her about the ranch, about their children and grandchildren, about the weather and the cattle and all the small details of life. Sometimes he felt foolish doing it, but other times he could almost feel her presence, could almost hear her voice answering him back. Spring came, and with it the anniversary of their first meeting, 45 years since the blizzard. Porter decided to make one final trip to the cabin. William tried to talk him out of it, worried about his father making the journey alone, but Porter was determined. "I need to do this," he said. "I need to go back one more time." So William saddled a gentle horse for his father and watched nervously as Porter rode north toward the high country. It took most of the day, with Porter stopping frequently to rest, but eventually he reached the little cabin. It looked even more weathered now, the wood silvered with age, but it was still standing, still strong. Porter dismounted and went inside. The interior was dim and dusty, clearly unused for some time. But the fireplace was still there, and above it, the carving he had made so long ago. CM plus PM. 1885. Porter traced the letters with gnarled fingers and felt tears roll down his weathered cheeks. "I am here, Clara," he said aloud. "Back where it all began. Back where you fell through that door and changed my life forever." He could almost see her as she had been that day, frozen and frightened but still trying to be polite, still holding on to her dignity. He could almost hear her voice thanking him for the coffee, for the fire, for saving her life. He could almost feel her pressed against him as they slept by the fire, the trust and comfort that had grown between them even in those first fraught days. "I miss you," Porter said, his voice breaking. "God, Clara, I miss you so much. 45 years together was not enough. 100 years would not have been enough. But I am grateful for what we had. I am grateful for every day, every moment. You made my life mean something. You made me better than I ever would have been alone." He stayed in the cabin until sunset, sitting by the cold fireplace and remembering. Then, as the light began to fail, he stood and touched the carving one last time. "Until we meet again," he whispered. "Wait for me, my love. I will find you again, wherever you are." Porter made it back to the ranch house as full darkness fell. William was waiting anxiously, and he helped his father inside and made him comfortable by the fire. Porter was exhausted, more tired than he had been in years, but there was a peace in his eyes that had not been there since Clara died. That night, Porter lay down in the bed he had shared with Clara for 45 years. He closed his eyes and thought of her smile, her laugh, the way she had looked at him like he was the best man in the world. He thought of their children and grandchildren, the legacy they had created together. He thought of the ranch and the life they had built, and all the years of love and joy and partnership. And as he drifted off to sleep, Porter could have sworn he felt a familiar warmth beside him, as if Clara had come to lie down next to him one more time. He reached out in the darkness and felt, or imagined he felt, her hand slip into his. "There you are," he murmured. "I knew you would come back." Porter McCall died peacefully in his sleep that night, 3 months after losing his beloved wife. The doctor said it was his heart, simply worn out after 70 years of life. But those who knew him best said he had died of a broken heart, unable to live without the woman he loved. Or perhaps, more accurately, he had died of a completed heart, having lived a full and joyful life with the woman who had been his everything. They buried Porter next to Clara in the Snowflake Cemetery, under a large headstone that reads simply, "Porter and Clara McCall, together always. 1885–1930. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down to William, and then to his children and grandchildren after him. The cabin in the high country was maintained as a family shrine of sorts, a place where descendants of Porter and Clara could go to remember the blizzard that had started it all. The carving above the fireplace was carefully preserved, a testament to a love that had endured through decades and beyond death itself. And on cold winter nights when the snow fell thick and the wind howled through the pines, some swore they could see 2 figures in the cabin, dancing slowly by firelight, holding each other close. Just 2 people who had found each other in a storm and refused to let go, not even when death tried to part them. 2 people who had proven that love, real love, the kind that weathers every storm and grows stronger with each passing year, is the most powerful force in the world. The story of Porter and Clara McCall became a legend in that part of Arizona, passed down through generations. Grandchildren told it to their grandchildren, the tale of the blizzard and the cabin and the cowboy who gave a freezing stranger his fire and his only blanket. It became a story about kindness and honor, about taking chances on love, about building something lasting and true. And every time the story was told, people would nod and smile, reminded that sometimes the hardest moments of our lives, the times when we are most afraid and most vulnerable, are actually the moments when the greatest blessings arrive. that sometimes getting lost is the only way to find what we are really looking for. That sometimes a storm is not a disaster but a gift, blowing us exactly where we need to be. The white blizzard that had sealed Clara Thornton and Porter McCall in one small cabin in January of 1885 had indeed been a gift. It had given them each other, had given them a love that lasted a lifetime, had given them a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. And in the end, what more could anyone ask for than to love and be loved, to find their person and hold on tight through whatever storms life brings? That was the true legacy of Porter and Clara McCall. Not the ranch they built or the children they raised, important as those things were. Their true legacy was the proof they provided that love, real and deep and true, was not only possible but worth everything it cost. Worth the risk of opening your heart, worth the pain of eventual loss, worth every moment of joy and laughter and tears and struggle. Love was worth it all. And a white blizzard, a cowboy, a fire, and a single blanket had been the beginning of a love story for the ages.